everybody, you're listening to the Tech Alliance pod, or the TAP for short. My name is Andre, and today I'm flying solo as a host again. But do not worry, Marina is joining us in one of the very next episodes. And what a treat we have for you today. Earlier this season, we reviewed the book on partnerships for you, and we felt that we really didn't get enough of it. So today with us is the one, the only, captain of the partnership, author of the book on partnerships, head of strategic partnerships at Opus Clip, host of the San Francisco Partnership Leaders chapter, Franz Josef Schrepf. Welcome, Franz.
Thank you for having me, Andre, and what an introduction. I'm super excited to be on the tap.
Well, at some point, crossovers are about to happen in any universe, and it seems like this is the season for partnership crossovers.
Yeah, very true.
So,
very true.
But we'll talk about this in a second. I don't know if any of our listeners, if you're listening to us and you don't know who Franz is, please say so in the comments. We'd like to find out how are you able to exist in our world without coming across Franz's content, which is awesome. But for those of us who maybe even know you but don't know so much about you, tell us a little bit about your partnership journey, sort of professional-wise, company-wise, but also the other stuff that you're doing in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same about your show as well. We said this before we started rolling as well, but there aren't that many people who are creating interesting partnerships content right now anymore. There used to be 2 years ago, and I think now it's kind of flattened out. Hopefully it's going to pick up again. I think there's more interest now from outside of the partnerships community. So it's really important that, people like you and Marina are doing the Lord's work of spreading good information for people who know nothing about partnerships and help them learn about this topic and bring them into the ecosystem as well. Because that's the only way we can actually, make sure that partnerships is not niche, but actually something which is part of the mainstream go-to-market for every company.
It's high praise coming from you, and calling it Lord's work is another level. So we'll take that. We'll take that. But yeah. You're the one to talk. Tell us a little bit about what you do outside of on top of your day job.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's hard to imagine now because I'm all about partnerships. But around 5 years ago, I actually did not know anything about partnerships. 5-6 years ago, I was a startup founder in London. My startup didn't work out, and I joined a virtual event startup called Hopin, which was very early stage. We only were 16 people. But as you can imagine, March 2020 was when the pandemic happened and every single event globally had to move online. And so all of a sudden we went from 0 leads to over 1,000 leads a day. And we had to figure out how can we scale our operations up? And so the first natural fit for that was agency partnerships. We realized that there were a lot of event agencies who had their entire book of business wiped out and needed to now shift to virtual events as well. And so for every agency we onboarded, we had 10 to 40 people who were all in on Hopin and could sell, service, and promote Hopin for us. And that was a real unlock for me where I realized, okay, partners is the way to go because we can actually scale up much faster and reach completely different markets, which we wouldn't even have capacity to reach through these partnerships. And then over time, more and more people reached out to me because once your title is partnerships, you basically become the go-to person for everything, which is weird in the company. And so more and more people reached out about tech alliances and integrations and so forth. And so then I went over to the App Store side and built out a Hopin App Store with over 50 integrations, and then also managed multiple strategic alliances, including an alliance with LinkedIn, where LinkedIn invested up to $50 million in Hopin at the time as well. And so I've spanned a whole gamut of partnerships. And we made several acquisitions, including a live streaming tool called StreamYard. So I also managed partnerships on that side, which was very different from the virtual event side, which was sales-led. StreamYard was more the product-led side. So that had a different motion for partnerships as well. And last year, we had our first daughter, and I had a bit of time during paternity leave. And so it was either, sitting at home and playing video games or writing a book. And I challenged myself to write the book on partnerships during that time. And so I summarized all my own learnings, as well as the conversations and slides and all that stuff that I learned over the last 4 or 5 years into one single book. Because on top of my own learnings, I also host a podcast called The Partnership, where I interview partnerships professionals every 2 weeks live on LinkedIn. And I summarized learnings from there, as well as the books I've read, as well as the meetups I host in San Francisco, all of that information, 140 sources into a short 200-page book, and then, gave it to the partnerships community. And it's I'm very proud of it because it's one of the few books which is not trying to sell you anything. It's really just designed to help people who know nothing about partnerships break into this field and get a foundational understanding of what partnerships actually are and how they can help your startup win.
Yeah, I absolutely love that about your book. It did feel like a read. I have a few years of partnerships under my belt. and I still found it very useful, but I could totally see how this is like the book that I will from now on recommend to anybody who's starting out, who's new to the role, or is trying to figure out how to do that for their company or anything like this. Such a clear structure, everything neatly laid out. Great job there.
Yeah.
So well done. But look, now that we started talking about the book a little bit already, tell us a little bit about the process. You talked about like what led you to writing it. But did you literally write it during your pet leave? Like, did find publishers and all of that? How was any of that? Like, it's to me, it seems like an insurmountable mountain. How did you even approach that?
It was definitely like a challenge, but I don't like to shy away from challenges. Like, I think it was always like a dream for me to write a book, like ever since I was a little kid when I was writing stories and stuff like that. So I just need to find out a topic. And one of the things which happened over the last like 5-6 years is that whenever I learned something new about partnerships, I posted it on LinkedIn and I said, this is something I basically learned about partnerships, about like, how to measure partnerships or how to avoid channel conflict and so forth. And then the partnerships community on LinkedIn is very active. So people would comment and actually help me like troubleshoot my thinking. So they would either say like, this is great content, or they would comment and say like, actually, you need to think this through better. And so they were like really, really smart and talented people and VPs and chief partner officers and so forth who commented on this content. And we kind of helped refine the book through that process together. Because once the paternity leave started, what I did was I sat down and it took like 3 weeks, but I looked for every single LinkedIn post I've ever done and looked at like the likes and comments I got on the LinkedIn post. And some of them had like, hundreds or thousands of likes. And so in that moment, it was clear that this is something which people really want to read. And then you could go through the comments and understand why they wanted to read it. And so the book on partnerships is an incredibly data-driven book where every single idea which made it into the book has actually been stress tested live with the partnerships community on LinkedIn to make sure that it's actually something which is valuable to the audience. And then on top of that, like on my own content, I also like attended a lot of conferences, watched a lot of webinars, had all these conversations in private or in public about partnerships. And so I just had like, I think I had 2,000 notes on my Evernote for around partnerships, just because like you go to a conference and you take a picture of a slide, for example, and that was like one of the notes. And so this is all like dispersed. And so the information for partnerships is all out there. It's just not easily accessible. Nobody's ever sat down and actually like structured it in like a very easily digestible, hopefully like slightly entertaining way to make it accessible for people who have no idea what partnerships are. And so that was just my project. It really just took like around 5 months from the start to finish once all the information was there. But if you think about it, because I had to post for 5 years on LinkedIn to get all the content and all the feedback, it kind of took like 5 years to write it.
Man, that's insane. And I love the discipline. I love the discipline and the structure that you bring to this. I think there's a great, if people drop off after the first 3 minutes as they want to do, if you got this piece of advice, this was already worth your time. So there you go. But please stay. There's lots more to discuss.
Yeah, a lot more. I think, yeah, to your point though, I think it's similar to what you and Marina are doing with the tap as well, right? It's important to not view these conversations and these pieces of content as standalone pieces, which will just sit there and then nobody watches them, or maybe people watch them, but that's it, right? I think it's really important to view them as like a stepping stone to like larger projects where you can then remix, refine, build on top of that knowledge, right? It's a waste if the conversation just ends here. It should ideally be like just a stepping stone to like help you refine your ideas as you move forward.
This is such a networking, such a community, such an ecosystem and partnerships mindset. It's absolutely... it's lovely to hear somebody talk about it that way. I'm not surprised that you are, and I hope that our listeners should learn that as well. Like it's this, our work in partnerships is, there's a science to it. So there's definitely some mechanics, and there's a lot of data, and this tooling definitely helps. But to me, it always comes back and again to mindset and how you approach things. And certainly, you can cultivate various mindsets that would be appropriate, but you definitely should think about it. Tell me one thing before we jump into talking about the book into a bit more detail. Is there anything now, in hindsight, now that almost it's been over a year since the book has been out, right? Correct me.
It's been around 8 months, yes.
Around 8 months, so not even a year still. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Even in that time, with the feedback that you've received, is there anything that you would have done differently now?
So I think one of the hardest things around the book is that you will go through phases writing it. And so in the beginning, you're really
Mm.
excited. Then at some point, you realize that it might not turn out exactly how you imagined it to turn out. And there's like a bit of a slump in motivation because you're like, this is way too much information. It would be it would be way too hard to summarize all of this, and it would be just not entertaining to read. So you have to make very hard decisions on what makes it into the book and what doesn't, because I really wanted to keep it around 200 pages so people can, scan it through in like a weekend or something like that. And so during that time, like I had to make a lot of tough decisions on what to cut, what not. I think there was a lot of information that I find helpful, which just didn't make the cut because I just looked at the data and said like, hey, it didn't do well on LinkedIn. People didn't engage with it as much. So it's probably not going to be something we should put in there. And then a couple other things which I think have changed is there are a couple of ideas which actually people have approached me about and then refined further. And so one, which, I think you discussed in your book review as well, is the idea of the SaaS buying river, or the idea that you should not like treat your ecosystem as like one big blob, but basically like map it against the buyer journey and say like, what is pre-purchase, what is post-purchase? And so Martin Schultz and Delia Janssen, who I want to give a shout out here, they have actually taken that idea much further and have showed me like, what this would look like to visualize it and to create graphics and so forth. And I wish we would have put those into the book as well. But I might release a second version once I have enough of those ideas.
Yeah, it all sounds like a sequel is in the works. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah, another book on partnerships.
Well, yes, I mean, of course, why not? And plus, you've been putting out so much more content since, so
Yeah.
I think the principles and the approach still applies. Okay, that's fascinating. So let's get into the book. I think our listeners are dying to learn from the horse's mouth about some of the main themes and some of the key questions that we had when reading through it. Let's start at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
For me, one of the key themes that stood out and one of the major takeaways was that you state that partnerships don't have their own goals and they support the goals of other departments. I find that very straightforward, clearly, of course. I mean, unless you have a product or a service, what the hell are you partnering about? And yet, every time I think about it, it kind of grates me the wrong way. So maybe it's a mindset thing. Can you elaborate a little bit on how this philosophy guides partnerships in practice for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think the observation is something which I've seen firsthand myself talking to hundreds of partnership leaders. So what happens oftentimes is that a company decides to invest in partnerships. They will hire a partnerships leader. The first question is, where does this partnership leader sit? It's oftentimes not clear, right? It's so weird because when I started in partnerships, I would ask people like, which org do you report into? And every single one of them said something different. Everybody was like, I report to the CEO, the CMO, the CRO, the chief product officer. And so it just became clear that like, okay, there's something strange going on here. And I started unraveling it by just realizing that there are 5 different types of partnerships and each one of them reports to a different department. And like, it makes sense for them to report to a different department because they contribute to the goals of that department. The second mistake, which oftentimes happens when a company hires a new partnerships leader, is that they then ask them to set their own goals. And so the partnership leader will say, I will contribute, 10% of the company's revenue. But it's not grounded in like a connection to, for example, the sales team or the marketing team who actually will do the work. Like you as a partnership leader are oftentimes under-resourced or understaffed. Like you're just one person who's trying to contribute 10% of the company's, revenue. How is that going to work? Like you need the marketing team, you need the sales team. But for them, partnerships are often the sideshow. Like also when I started out in partnerships, for example, like initially, whenever I wanted to run co-marketing activities with partners, they were just like extracurricular activities. The marketing team liked to do these like co-marketing activities. They thought it was cool. But every time like it became like, a crunch or we were missing our number for the quarter, they didn't want to engage anymore. And so it's really important to make sure that you align with the goals of the people who are actually doing the work around the partnership. And make sure that like you're a line item on their OKRs. You're like one of the KRs is like partner generated revenue. So you can always point to it and say like, you are the one who is actually going to help me like achieve this goal. Because you as a partnerships manager or a partnerships leader, you're more like a portfolio manager or like an orchestrator who has to like help other people, do their job to achieve their goals.
I love this. I love the way you explained it, right? I think I particularly love the fact that number one is the way you shift direction and you think of yourself as, yes, you are serving the goals of those other departments. But the point is that you're not just serving, you're aligning, right? And without that alignment, you can't actually do anything.
Yeah.
All right.
I think another thing I wanted to say there as well is like, what is the symptom? How do you know if you're not doing it correctly, right? The symptom is that you join a company as a new partnerships leader, you set your own goals, then you miss those goals, and then you get laid off, and your answer is like, oh, they don't get partnerships, or marketing didn't give me the resources I need, or product has no resources for me, and so forth. And my favorite like response a lot of partnership leaders have when this situation happens is like they don't get partnerships. But guess what? You're hired to educate them on partnerships. You're the one they bring in because they want to get partnerships, right? And so if they don't get it, like there's two options. Either they like completely are ignorant, but probably not. I mean, otherwise they would have not hired a partnerships leader, right? Or you're not doing a great job explaining it to every single stakeholder in the company, which is why another reason why it's so important to have this kind of content out there, which is very accessible for everybody, because now you can just go to, your marketing person or to your product person and just say like, hey, here's a book. You can just read it. Like just read this one chapter. It's like 30 pages. And it's going to explain to you exactly like what I'm trying to do here with you and how it like loops back to your goals.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Especially the bit where you say what I'm trying to do with you.
Yeah.
Not so much just let me tell you what I do in my job and why I'm so amazing, but what is it that we're trying to accomplish together?
Yeah. Partnerships can help you reach your goal. That's the most important to understand. It's like product will have goals, marketing will have goals, sales will have goals. Partnerships are the way to get there, right? The way to get there without hiring like a million people or like bloating your product or, like
exactly.
getting into like weird management situations.
No, and plus exactly, and hiring a million people doesn't guarantee success, right? And we've seen examples of that, and it leads to all sorts of interesting corporate situations once you realize that you've overhired. It's not even
exactly
getting to that.
But it's just people don't scale linearly, right? That's one of the observations as well. It's like it's very tempting to open like an office in Germany because Germany is like the fourth biggest economy in the world. So like, why not, right? They have a lot of money. But the thing is that, now you have an office with people who speak a different language, have a different culture, and are also like in a completely different time zone if you're a US company. And so all of a sudden you have to manage like that entire dynamic, which is going to probably be like exponentially harder than just hiring additional people in the US. And so you realize like this might be something where if Germany is not a core market, it's probably better to outsource and like let a partner handle rather than you going there directly.
Not to mention good luck downsizing once you've hired somebody in Germany.
Oh, that's brutal.
Yeah, exactly. So that is, it's there for a reason, and I'm all for labor protection laws, but you need to be aware of them when you expand into certain markets.
Yeah.
Coming back to our essentials and without talking about labor protections too much. So we talked about, we could be here all day. So you mentioned the different departments, and you mentioned you talked about this in the context of different partnership leaders potentially reporting up to different places and so on. And you provide this pyramid, the concept of the pyramid of marketing, service, channel, product, and alliances, right?
Yeah.
Is this some kind of is this like a Mario Brothers type level by level progression that a partnerships person goes through? Do you as a junior partnerships person start in marketing and then you graduate to alliances? How does this work in practice?
Yeah.
And should this work?
Yeah, I think you touched on something really important, which I outlined in the book a little bit more in detail. But in the pyramid, basically the marketing partnerships are at the bottom and the alliance partnerships at the very top, right? And the first thing which is important to observe with this graphic is that it's much easier to have a lot of marketing partners versus aligned partners, because marketing partners, they don't require a lot of effort. You might have like an affiliate link you give them. You might do like a shared blog post or like, a PR statement or something like that, and you're going to work together. But it's really like a low lift partnership, but also low reward oftentimes. It's very unlikely that a marketing partnership is going to like completely change the game for you. But in aggregate, they might be very impactful for your business. On the other side, an alliance partnership is a combination of all the previous types. So it's a marketing partnership, service, channel, and product partnership all in one, where you really like bet on this partner and say like, we're going to go all in on this partner. And so that's a very important decision to make, because you're investing so many resources into this partnership that if you get it wrong, you might fail. And you also don't have that many resources normally as a startup to invest. So you can probably only do like one or two maybe of these kind of alliance partnerships at a time.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's pyramid shaped. It's just to show that the volume of partners will change for each level of investment. The other thing is that because the risk also changes with each level, like marketing partnerships, low risk, alliance partnerships kill the company level risk. One of the ways to approach partnerships is to like level up one step at a time. So it is kind of like Mario Brothers. I don't think it necessarily like has to do with the career of a person, that like a partnerships person should start out in marketing partnerships versus tech. I think it depends more on what the company needs. But one way to think about partnerships is to just de-risk each layer. So you de-risk by like, for example, doing a marketing partnership. What is the response from your shared customer base? Is it good? Like, are they happy? Are you both seeing leads? Great. Let's progress to the next step. Let's like enable each other on like servicing our tools. So when we have shared customers, they can support each other, right? Our customer success can like support these shared customers, right? Then you can like go one step further and like, hey, maybe we should like start co-selling. Like maybe we should start like, reselling one solution, or, helping each other sell solutions better, right? And then finally, like, okay, we're having like a serious like overlapping customer base. Maybe we should invest in an integration now and like solidify this partnership even further.
Yeah.
And so the investment increases, but also the risk and potentially the reward as well. Hopefully the reward, otherwise it wouldn't be worth doing.
What I love about this approach is that you can apply this not only to a company that is just starting out doing any kind of partnerships. This you could be at one of the largest companies in the world. New products get spun up all the time, new initiatives, new risky programs, and you can apply the very same structure to them as well internally. Even if you already have a whole freaking alliance management team that manages the largest companies that are your competitors and your partners at the same time, it doesn't mean that all of them all of a sudden will need to get involved with this new idea of yours, right?
Yeah.
So I think this the step by step and the layer by layer approach and the de-risking piece, super valuable, whatever it is, whatever stage you're at and whatever it is you're doing. Another framework that you introduce, and I mean, no good book is complete without a nice complement of 4 C's of something.
Yeah.
The other alternative is 4 P's, but 4 C's are good too. So customers' capabilities, capacity, and commitment. I find like super valuable, right? And it's, the people use these frameworks for a reason. It's easy to remember, and they actually do make sense. My question to you would be, what about measuring them, right? I found like my day job is in product partnerships.
Yeah.
And I find it super challenging to measure many of these things, especially in advance. Like talk about capabilities. What possible scale could you apply to compare your potential partners?
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We do love our alliterations, so nothing is complete without like 4 C's, 4 P's, 4 A's, whatever it is. And I want to give a shout out to Nelson Wang, who heads up partnerships at Airtable, who actually came up with this framework. So Nelson and I, like we met on the podcast actually for the first time, and since then we've just been like bantering a lot about frameworks and models. And so he gracefully allowed me to include some of them in the book as well. For the 4 C's, I would be curious to hear like some of the challenges you've had with measurement, if you like can get a little bit more specific, and then I'm happy to troubleshoot them live.
Well, so let's talk capabilities, right? This is the closest to my heart, because the way I try to figure out if a partner is a good fit for what we're trying to do with them is their technologies. I'm trying to simplify this as quickly as I can. If their technology stack is aligned with ours,
mm-hmm.
and depends on ours significantly enough, and on ours I mean in the sense people know that I work at Chrome on privacy, to benefit from the new solutions that we're providing. Because if they don't actually use any of our existing solutions, any of our existing APIs, it's unlikely that the new ones, well, it's not impossible, but it's unlikely that the new ones will be of any use to them. And at the same time, if they're not interested in developing, or in the case of capabilities, unable to invest in the introduction of new APIs, I would love to be able to know that upfront and to be able to compare the extent of their ability to do it, right? So therefore, when we talk about something like capabilities, I'm immediately thinking, well, yes, generally speaking, I can, as a rule of thumb, say that this partner is more capable than the other. But how do we actually bring the science into this? How do we properly compare this?
Yeah, that's a great example. I think the advantage you have working at Chrome, right, is just that there are so many users. And so I think the first C is really important, right? If you like remember the 4 C's, it's customers, capabilities, capacity, and commitment. The customer is probably the single most important part of that framework. Do you have shared customers? Do you have overlapping customers? If you're working with like brand new developers who are just, experimenting with like building Chrome extensions or like using APIs, that can be a real challenge. And those are oftentimes a bit of a crapshoot. Like I would say like 80 to 90% of the partnerships which failed in my career have been with companies where we did not have overlapping customers, because there's just so much unknown, right? Like there's basically no product market fit between the partner and the customer yet that you know of. And what happens is that if you like start investing in a partnership like that, you kind of run the risk of running a what we call a Barney partnership. And a Barney partnership is basically when you and the partner hold hands and you sing about how great it's going to be when you like start working together, and the customer's like left out somewhere else, and they're like, why are these two people singing? Why would I engage with them, right? And this happened to me.
They just seem to be having fun, so I should probably leave them alone.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I don't want to be part of this. And so this happened to me like quite a bit, like during the peak of the pandemic, because two things which were really popular at the time were like crypto and metaverse. And so everybody wanted like to use crypto and metaverse as part of their virtual events, which kind of on the surface, it just makes so much sense, right? It's like virtual native, and we're virtual events. And so having online payments, having NFTs, having like, 3D characters, whatever, would be so helpful. But nobody actually knew what that would look like. And so we went out and we looked at capabilities. We looked at like who is capable of solving these issues that our customers are having. And we like worked with them. We showed them to customers. Customers were like, oh, this would be really cool. I would totally want something like this, right? So we're like, great. Customers are happy about it. Like now we just have to build the integration. And then once we built the integration, there were all these issues that they had. One was like, security requirements. Like crypto companies were oftentimes like 4 months old. So like all our customers were like, well, they don't have SOC 2. And it's like, it's really hard to get SOC 2 if you're like 4 months old and you're just two dudes in the basement. The other one was like the metaverse, like the learning curve for a lot of the tools was actually way higher than expected. And so on the demo, like where they were like, look at all the cool things you can do with your character. But then once customers actually started using it, they were like, this is going to take forever. Like, I don't know how to like do this, right? Because like they designed their platform for like, teenagers who are like on Minecraft and Roblox and stuff. And like the attendees we had were all in like their 50s and they didn't know how to like, navigate 3D environments. And so basically without shared customers, the rest is actually like not very important. Like if you don't have shared customers, it's so hard to get the capabilities, capacity, and commitment right. But then if we look at the other C's, once we have identified shared customers, capabilities is more about the use cases. Capabilities is more about like, can they solve the issue I need, right? So with agencies, it would be, for example, language. Like, can they provide services in the language I need? If they, say that they're a German-based agency, but they actually don't speak German, then it's like, well, that's not going to be great. Like, you're not actually able to service German customers because you don't speak the language. You don't know the regulatory frameworks. So that's important. Same with like, in your case, I guess it would also be technical capabilities. Like, are they able to actually solve the use case for the customer? Are they able to like provide services at the level that you expect them to? That's another thing, right? Yeah. Like they might be able to do what they promise, but then because there are only two people in a basement, like the app always crashes, or like the company is actually not able to deliver a kind of like standard that you would expect from somebody who works with a reputable brand like yours.
That makes sense, I think, and also the way you just laid it out, that we're almost, again, we're not looking at a pyramid here, but again, we're looking at a stack structure where you have a foundation, and everything else builds on top of it, and the foundation is unsurprisingly customers. I think that makes a world of sense. It makes a world of sense, and at the end of the day, like this is never going to be an exact science, and you might not be able to even, like when talking back to your example about an agency in Germany, it might be difficult maybe to compare exactly the capabilities of several agencies that claim the same thing. But as you say, then you just try. Try a couple of things, start small, and see how they perform, and that gives you a great indicator.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to experiment and like de-risk, similar to what we just talked about with the pyramid as well. And then what I like about the 4 C's is that customers can often answer the other questions for you, right? So customers can tell you whether they have the capabilities to actually solve the problem for them. Because customers will be like, oh, they actually do this, and this for us, and they're doing a really great job. So you're like, great, capabilities there. Then capacity. You look at the customers they're servicing. Are they servicing like 10 people companies, or are they servicing like giant multinational corporations? How many of them are they servicing right now? Like, can they handle the volume that you're looking for? Because at StreamYard, for example, we were the number 1 live streaming tool in the market. We had like tens of millions of users. And then, companies would approach us and they say like, okay, we have, 7 overlapping customers that want an integration, and this is the use cases like live shopping or something like that. But the problem is that, if we have tens of millions of users, like your 7 customers are probably not exciting to us. We need like tens of thousands of customers to actually move the needle. And it's the same for like large companies like, Google, for example. You need like, your tens of millions of dollars worth of opportunity to even get excited about this opportunity. As a startup, you might think like, oh, this 6-figure deal is like a big thing. But for Google, it's just the capacity needs to be completely different. And then
and
go for it.
no, go away. This is just this. It's reminiscent a little bit of the way. It's not necessarily that there's going to be a Barney partnership in there, but it feels
Yeah.
very similar. Where you even inside a big company, somebody might get excited about the potential, but then when you actually look at the potential of a partner, right? But then when you look at the reality of it, you're going to go, okay, yes, this could at least initially can be nothing but an experiment,
Yeah.
right? And you really need to then prove yourself to be able to align appropriately, right? So that the expectations are matched on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight as well is like the last C is commitment. And that's one where you can also fall on your face really hard. Because if you look, for example, at large multinational agencies, like in the event space, there are agencies which just have offices in 7 locations and they employ like, thousands of people. And so that sounds like theoretically like it could be the perfect partner because they have a large volume, they have large capabilities, they probably have a lot of overlapping customers with you as well. But then they also service like 200 tools. So you're always just going to be like one of the 200 in their tool stack, right? And then you have to train all their teams on this, and then like you have to explain why this one is better than this one, and like it becomes a nightmare to manage. Versus for us at Hopin, at least, what worked really well, for example, with agencies, was to just go to agencies which were willing to just go all in on your company. And so for the agency, that's obviously a bigger risk because they have only one tool, but it just streamlines everything so much. Like the onboarding for them, whenever they had to scale up, was just our certification program. Like whenever they hired a new employee, they would just like do the Hopin certification. It takes like 1 week. And then after that, you're like fully onboarded onto the product and you can just go out and sell it. And like every customer they talked to, they were just selling Hopin to. And so that just made it much easier for us as well, because we could send them customers knowing that they're not going to like do a switcheroo on us and go like, oh, you have a customer from Hopin, but actually this tool will be better. And then all of a sudden we lose the customer because the agency actually sells a different tool. And so we streamlined our operations and increased trust significantly if you get like an upfront commitment that the partner is going to like only invest in your tool for this specific use case.
Man, we're rapidly running out of time, and there's so much more ground I want to cover with you. We could go on all day. I swear, this is amazing. This is pure gold, and I hope everybody's still listening to this. We're gonna try to make sure that we get out as much of this episode as possible and put all this advice in front of you. There's a few more things that stood out to us with Marina when we were reviewing the book, as things that would, they emphasized to us the need to talk to you directly and ask you some questions. And here they are. The first of them that I found fascinating was the concept of relationship debt, because that resonates so strongly. And I think I don't think there's anybody who's listening to us who hasn't experienced this, where it's much easier to get a relationship into a state where it can no longer progress than to get it out of that state. So what are your tips on avoiding incurring that debt?
Yeah.
And maybe, if anything, from your experience or even your theory on repairing damaged relationships, if that's even possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to take a step back on relationship debt, there's actually like a different side to the equation, which is social capital. And so what you're doing as a partnerships professional is you're actually just raising social capital, kind of like a VC would raise funding for their fund and then invest it in startups. You're raising social capital with the startups and then try to deploy it by like calling in favors, by asking them for by asking them to like commit to, for example, just your startup, as we just talked, as like part of the partnership as well.
We've all been there for sure.
And so it's really important that you need to understand that there's two things. There's like raising social capital and there is like relationship debt you incur. And the relationship debt happens if you, for example, don't deliver on your promise. You build a shitty integration. It like customers have a bad experience. Like anything negative that impacts the experience is like it leads to relationship debt, and anything that is positive leads to social capital. And so this is a little bit like Brene Brown is like somebody my wife listens to a lot, and she talks a lot about like marriage, and it's a little bit like analogous to that she talks about a jar of marbles, and every time you like raise social capital, you put marbles into the jar, and every time you like incur relationship debt, you take marbles out. And when there's no marbles in the jar, your relationship is basically dead. Like you incur too much relationship debt for like anybody to ever trust you again. And this happened, a couple of times. It's either like because you're unresponsive or because you're not doing your job well, or because of things that are out of your control. Like maybe the product wasn't ready, maybe it
True.
breaks, maybe you didn't apply the 4Cs framework and like didn't have overlapping customers,
The
and all of a
alignment.
sudden you build
Yeah.
something and nobody uses it, right? And so it's really important to like be mindful of that, because unlike a VC, relationship that can't just be paid down by like, with more social capital or raising more money. Like sometimes relationship debt is just so high that nobody wants to work with you. And especially in a relationship driven industry like partnerships, that can spread really fast. Like if you do a poor job with one partner, if they're like
Yeah.
somebody who's well known in the industry, like it can just spread and people will learn that you're not reliable. Like I had this several times where people, whenever like somebody approaches me for a partnership and they're like super excited and eager, and I'm like, something's wrong here. I start asking around whoever partnered with them in like my WhatsApp groups and Slack groups and so forth. And oftentimes like it will come out that, they reneged agreements, they were unreliable, they overpromised and underdelivered. And so that's the reputation you want to avoid.
Yeah, and that kind of debt is really hard to like. Well, any debt of that kind, it's like a bankruptcy almost. Like that kind of reputation
Yeah.
is hard to live down. What I really loved again about something that you said is because it connects really well with what we've discussed in the beginning, is the fact that sometimes as a partner, coming back to our audience and what we do as a partnerships person, you don't have full control over
Yeah.
what your company is capable of doing. So you have to rely on other people, and that brings us back to that alignment. You don't want to launch yourself into partnerships until you know that your marketing team, that your development team, all the other teams that are necessary are fully behind you.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're going to overpromise, underdeliver, and the jar of marbles is going to get empty and broken real fast.
Exactly. And I think you mentioned a really important point around like how can you avoid relationship debt, or worse, like what happens when you're so deep in debt that like it's basically broken, right? And so sometimes I do think that relationships can be beyond repair. And so in those moments, like if something is like completely broken and like people just don't trust you anymore to do a good job, the best way to resolve this is to start with a clean slate. And so that could be
Yeah.
either like just abandoning the partnership and saying like, hey, this one really didn't work out. Or if it's a really crucial partner which you just can't let go of, it's also like an option to bring in a new person and just say like, hey, actually like we let go of the old person, like, or they shifted onto a different project. This is going to be a new person. We're going to like try this better now. And then one thing which is really important to understand as well is that trust can only exist when, people, like when trust exists, people don't need transparency because they trust you to do a good job. You don't need to send them like a weekly update if they know that you're doing your job and you're, actually providing value. But if they start questioning that, and if they get really worried about like, like what you're doing and like you incur relationship debt because you, for example, messed up, the best way to solve this is to create a lot of transparency. The best way to resolve this is by just being super transparent. Like, this is what happened, here's how we're going to resolve it, I'm going to send you an update every single week, here's here are the people that are involved and so forth, and just giving them like an overview of what's happening behind the scenes. And that can
Yeah.
oftentimes like letting people look under the kimono can like incur a lot of social capital as well, because people feel like, wow, you trust me so much that you give me this information, which means I'm going to trust you again as well. And so that's another
I
strategy to
can
get around the relationship debt once you incurred it.
I can only second that. And don't wait until your relationship is so bad that you feel like it's almost broken. That kind of transparency, I mean, be reasonable, but transparency generates the trust and the social capital that we talked about.
Exactly.
And you mentioned that sort of letting go of. We don't want to pin everything on a specific partnerships person, because sometimes it's not about the partnerships person.
Yeah.
But if you are able to show your partners that these were the constraints, this is what we didn't anticipate, this is how we're going to deal with this in the future, this is one of the few tools in your toolkit that might potentially salvage the situation. If people are willing to give you a second chance, you need to show why you're worth it
Yeah.
and what exactly is going to go differently this time. No, this is awesome. Um, yeah, and also it's unsurprising. This is a bit of a tangent and we don't have a lot of time, but I'll just mention this briefly. When looking for a name for our podcast, I realized that actually there are a lot of podcasts and materials about partnerships. It's just they're not the partnerships that you and I talk about, right? There's all sorts of other content around partnerships.
Yeah.
But it is fascinating to the extent to which that content also applies. So, I mean, if you are looking for more content around partnerships and building great relationships, just watch some of that stuff. Partnerships are relationships between people. So anything you learn about how people work together definitely applies in this world as well.
Yeah,
Look,
100%.
maybe we have time for one or two more questions, at least one, the one I'm really keen on covering. And then maybe we'll just have to do this again at some point.
Yeah.
But look, this one is, I've heard this in different shapes from different places and really wanted to dive into this one with you. In particular, we've talked a lot about this with Eleanor when we're doing our special on spinning up
Yeah,
partnerships
Eleanor's great.
in new organizations. Eleanor is amazing. Absolutely. Shout out to Eleanor Thompson, our favorite co-host and guest and everything and friend of the podcast. So this is about the apparent contradiction, right? Which can be like, I stress the apparent because once you dig into this, I don't think it's a contradiction anymore. But how do you think about the fact that on the one hand, partnerships should be in a company's DNA, but on the other hand, we generally advise people not to launch themselves into partnerships from day one. How do those two, like, how do you reconcile that?
Yeah. That is probably the most controversial part of the book. How it started was that I posted on LinkedIn just a poll and said, like, when is the right time to get into partnerships? And it blew up. It was like very popular among the partnerships community. People just weighed in. People started arguing. And like what surprised me was that over 50% of people said that from day one is the right time to invest in partnerships. And my fear here is that this was a knee-jerk reaction for partnerships people because they just want to like broaden the aperture and just say like, oh, every company should hire me, right? But I don't think that's the right approach because you're setting yourself up for failure if you get hired at a company which is not ready for partnerships. And so what we instead try to do in the book is try to explain like, okay, when is the right time to work with partners? And the right time to work with partners is when you figured your stuff out. Like ideally post product market fit. Like when you figure out your direct sales motion, when you talk to customers enough to feel like, okay, actually I can take the hands off the wheel a little bit. Like I know what customers want and we can just charge ahead. That's normally the time. Like it's normally around Series A funding for a startup or whenever you feel like, okay, we're ready to scale our operations. That's when partners can really help you because partners can be a leverage, right? Instead of hiring one salesperson, you bring one partner on board who has 10 salespeople. And so all of a sudden there's 10 people selling on behalf of you. But the flip side of that is that if you start investing in partnerships too early and like bring on these 10 salespeople too early, you're playing a game of telephone. You're whispering into the partner's ear, like, this is what we are selling. And then they're telling the salespeople and the salespeople tell the customer. And then by the time it comes back to you, you're not selling like software for, for accounting, but you're selling all of a sudden like an employer of record software because people got it wrong, right? Like it's somewhere along the chain, like people just completely misunderstood what you're actually doing. And so that's important because while you're still learning, while you're still pivoting in the early days, like you shouldn't have this dead weight of like partners, which is really heavy and difficult to lift, like to move, but you should like stay nimble and like, build yourself and like learn as fast as you can. So that's my take. But the conundrum is that, in the book we did mention that that companies should think about partners from day one and that should be part of their DNA, right? And so the reality is that as a CEO, you should always have like a 2 to 3 year perspective at least on where the company will go. And you need a really good understanding of your customers as well. And part of your customer's life are the influencers, the service providers, and the tools that they use. And these are all potential partners. And so if you ask a CEO, who should we partner with? They should be able to like list out a list of like companies which are influencing our customers either before they buy us or after they buy us. And so a CEO will always do partnership stuff. They always talk to potential strategic investors. They always talk to customers to figure out like who else are the customers talking to? Where can we find new pools of customers? But at the same time, like it's important to remember that until you're sure that this information is true, you probably shouldn't go all in on those partnerships. You can maybe try a little bit and experiment in the early days, but like hiring a partnerships person, going all in and so forth is probably only valid if you know who your customers are. Like figure out your customers first, and then you figure out the partners based on the customers and not the other way around.
You said a couple of things that are absolute gold. Like everything you've said so far today has been super useful, but this one is just so near and dear to me that I can't get enough of it. It's that, as you said, your CEO or whoever it is, like it doesn't have to be a startup. You can, because I can keep thinking from the perspective of a very large company. It's not that much different. Your product owner, your product manager, the technical lead, they should be able to say who your customers, who your partners can be. It doesn't mean they should be your partners today. But as you said, 2-3 years from now, who could that be? And with that knowledge and understanding, I would highly advocate baking that into the product. You're not going to partner with these companies from day one.
Yeah.
But 2 years from now, you should have the capabilities built in and the technical infrastructure and the organizational infrastructure in place to just seamlessly bring those people on board and say, now we're ready for you. And we don't need to change almost anything about our product because we thought about you from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And that just bootstraps you and propels you so much faster. Yeah, it's a tough one to crack. I found that, in my experience, not enough. I was going to say few. I'm not going to quantify it, but not enough product leaders have that kind of mindset from the beginning. And yeah, and then you start having this push and pull between partner leaders trying to justify their existence and saying, yes, we must absolutely partner with everybody right away. And the product leader going, well, no, because we're not ready. But that's not the point. The point is that the moment of readiness should be approached really carefully and you shouldn't rush into it.
Yeah.
And part of not rushing into it is making sure that your product, your software, your SaaS, whatever it is that you're doing, your service is actually ready. And you can only do that if you consciously approach that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
as I said, DNA.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things which is also important to understand is that partners are a great way to define your ICP, your ideal customer profile as well. So an example, for example, which I bring up in the book is a Slack integration called Donut, which matches you with our team members, right? And so it's really great for team building. But every single one of their customers is on Slack. They don't have any. Last time I checked, they didn't have any other integrations, right? So Slack is actually how they define their ICP. And so it makes sense that Slack is a very, very valuable partner to them as well. And so similarly, this can happen for you as well. If you look at the customer and go okay, what are all the jobs to be done for the customer? What are the things that we want to build in-house? What are the capabilities that we want to acquire? And what are the things that we should partner on? And one of the things we mentioned in the book as well is that product leaders always have a product hammer and they're just I want to build, boom. But then partner leaders are equally guilty of this, that they have a partner hammer and they're oh, we can partner on this, boom. But actually, it should just be a discussion between at least a product leader and the partnerships leader, but maybe corporate development as well, maybe the CEO, to just identify okay, all the jobs to be done for a customer, which ones are urgent, which ones are core capabilities, and let's map them out on our build by partner discussion.
What a note to end our talk on today. I think it highlights, all good conversations come back to this, I think, at the end. People should talk to each other internally at companies as well. And instead of trying to pull the rope in their own direction, talk to each other and align on common goals. And so we started by talking about alignment and we're finishing by talking about alignment. And all I can say, man, is it's been a tremendous joy and the privilege and the pleasure having you on. You've shared so much knowledge and you keep sharing so much knowledge, not just with me and all of our listeners today, but continuously. So as I said, if you're not subscribed to Franz yet, you'll find him fairly easily, but there will be some links in the description as well. Franz, once again, thank you so much. It's been a tremendous pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Andre. Appreciate you having me.
And with that, that's been us. It's been The Tap. Big thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in today. As always, please subscribe. Find us wherever you get your podcast from. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube and LinkedIn to stay tuned to the next episodes. Links are below. Catch you next time on The Tap.